Hello everyone, this is Onya. In this video I'm going to be beginning a series presenting my new version of the Bible as I progress and as I start to produce it. It's going to be very unique, very different than pretty much anything you've seen before. And I believe that I've been given this task to restore the scriptures as best as possible, using the sources we have, using textual criticism, and all kinds of parallel sources to try to fill in the holes. Because as I've said in other teachings, there's some very compelling evidence that our books of the Bible have been highly corrupted in many major ways. Some books worse than others. We don't have an exact idea how bad the corruption is. We only know that the corruption is extreme and severe in lots of these books. Now, it's just a clarifier. It's not extreme enough so that the books that we have, we can just ignore and say, okay, they're worthless because we don't know what we can trust in them. No, it's not quite that bad. But it's more about what are we missing? That's what this is all about. What are we missing? And the original words have long been altered and changed so that what we see is certainly not the original words of the writers in most of these books. Maybe a few of these books, it's preserving a large portion of the original wording, but for the most part, the vast majority of these books do not preserve the original wording in any way, shape, or form. But it does preserve the general basis, general idea, the content, the basic message, and in a way that is faithful to the original, but in an altered sense, in a condensed version. To give you an example, let's say you have a very specific I'll give an example. Just first thing that came to my head. Let's say in the original text, it says something about men, or maybe it says something about women. But instead of specifying men or women, it might be changed to mankind or human. Those type of changes happen a lot in Scripture, where the same essential idea is preserved, but the details are corrupted. The exact details. But despite there being a corruption, it doesn't really change the main point. You know, if it's a man, it's a person. If it's a woman, it's also a person. So you can see how changes like that can still preserve the essential message without radically, or I shouldn't say radically, but without destroying the message, I'll say. So there's a balance. There's a balance of being not too quick to dismiss the scriptures, but also not too quick to accept what the scriptures say. There's a balance. A lot of people, unfortunately, don't understand that balance. Some go to the one extreme of rejecting basically everything in the scriptures because they think one little tiny error makes the whole thing unreliable. On the other side, there are people who think every little thing, every little peculiar detail in it is the perfect original word of God and is flawless, and they'll believe whatever it says, but that just brings major problems, and the evidence highly contradicts that idea. So with that said, this is going to be the first in a series of videos in which I present for the first time my versions of different books of the Bible. My versions being taking the text of when there's Hebrew available, I will be translating the Hebrew in a more literal manner. Now, in the far off future, this is not going to be anytime soon, but in the far off future, I'm going to redo this whole thing and make it even more literal Hebrew. However, at this time, I have decided that super literal Hebrew is too much for people to handle, and it's going to take too long, and we need the books now. People need the books sooner rather than later. I could get this project done much quicker if I'm not focusing on super little translation, if I'm not focusing on all these ridiculous... hold on one second, okay? Anyways, so let me try to see where I was. Basically, my goal is to make this super little version of the Bible, but that's very complex and it's going to take way too long to do it for people's benefit. I need to make a version much sooner. And the other thing I wanted to do is translate all kinds of amazing manuscripts from other languages, like Ethiopian language, Coptic language, the Syriac Peshitta, the Latin Vulgate. But in reality, those versions are, for the most part, worthless in terms of textual criticism. They're mostly insignificant, and it'll mostly be a waste of time in the long run to put way too much time in that, to the detriment of the scriptures not being released for people. So I've decided I'm going to do a much simpler process of working on a more simpler English translation with only the main important witnesses that are absolutely essential for reconstructing the original text, and the ones which probably are not going to help that much at all, such as the ones that I mentioned, such as the Ethiopic Old Testament, the Syriac Peshitta, the Latin Vulgate of the Old Testament. I'm going to be ignoring those, so at least for my initial version that I'll be producing for people. But in the future, I intend to do a radical, very exhaustive, in-depth translation and critical edition of all the different versions of the Old Testament and New Testament and the extra apocryphal books. But you can see how that could take a very long time, decades, to be so extreme like that. So by making it less extreme, this I can get in a few years. I can make a new version of the Bible within a few years instead of decades. So that's going to be highly preferable to the alternative. So anyways, so I'm starting with the book of Obadiah. I just decided to start with the book of Obadiah because it's so short. But my unique version of the book of Obadiah results in a much more different version than our current version of Obadiah, and it has a lot of reconstruction that I've done, and perhaps I've done too much reconstruction, but I'm going to explain the principles of the reconstruction that I have done. And also, I want to do in the future an edition of the Hebrew text, the revised Hebrew text. But again, that's going to take a much longer time, so I'm not going to focus too much on the revised Hebrew text. I'm going to focus on primarily the English translation. So with that said, let's get started in the book of Obadiah. I'm going to share the screen. Okay. So we're going to start with Lives of the Prophets. This is an apocryphal book which gives summaries of the prophets' lives, and you very often, for each prophet, it gives information which is clearly derived from an apocryphal book. It gives information that's clearly derived from apocryphal books. So for the reading of Obadiah, what we see is he was from the region of Shechem, of the field of Beth Hakerem. He was a pupil of Elijah, and having done much in his service, he was saved from death by him. He was that third captain of 50 whom Elijah spared, and went down with him to Ahaziah. Afterward, the king, he became a prophet, and upon his death, he was buried with his fathers. So it's pretty short, but it gives us some extra information that we don't have in the Old Testament. What it tells us is where he was from, so the region of Shechem, or the field of Beth Hakerem. They had to get that information somewhere. It must have been from a book of Obadiah, another book of Obadiah. He was a pupil of Elijah, we are told. We don't know that from the book of Obadiah, but we are told that that's the case. He was saved by death. He was saved from death by Elijah, because he was the third captain of 50 whom Elijah spared. That account is in 2 Kings. The captain is unnamed in 2 Kings. However, in the Orthodox churches, which often have very ancient traditions based on apocryphal sources, in those Orthodox churches, they have their tradition that Obadiah was that third captain of 50. Furthermore, they also have the tradition that he was the same Obadiah individual mentioned in 1 Kings, near the end of 1 Kings. Because there's a man who's a steward of King Ahab, and his name in 1 Kings is Obadiah. In fact, I'm just going to go to there just to kind of show you guys it's like basic gist of this. And the reason I'm going through this stuff is because I believe the book of Obadiah in our Bibles is a excerpt from a much longer book of Obadiah that once existed and which no longer exists. And I'm going to show some evidence for that in just a moment. So basically the background to this is there is a famine caused by Elijah for 3.5 years. So we're told, came to pass after many days that the word of the Lord came to Elijah in the 3rd year, saying, "Go present yourself to Ahab, and I will send rain on the earth." So Elijah went to present himself to Ahab, and there was a severe famine in Samaria. And Ahab had called Obadiah, who was in charge of his house. Now Obadiah feared the Lord greatly. For so it was, while Jezebel massacred the prophets of the Lord, that Obadiah had taken 100 prophets and hidden them, 50 to a cave, and had fed them with bread and water. And Ahab had said to Obadiah, "Go into the land, to all the springs of water, and to all the brooks. Perhaps we may find grass to keep the horses and mules alive, so that we will not have to kill any livestock." So they divided the land between them to explore it. Ahab went one way by himself, and Obadiah went another way by himself. Now as Obadiah was on his way, suddenly Elijah met him, and he recognized him, and fell on his face, and said, "Is that you, my lord Elijah?" And he answered him, "It is I. Go tell your master Elijah is here." So he said, "How have I sinned that you are delivering your servant into the hand of Ahab to kill me? The Lord your God lives. There is no nation or kingdom where my master has not sent someone to hunt for you." And when they said, "He is not here," he took an oath from the kingdom or nation that they could not find you. And now you say, "Go tell your master Elijah is here." And it shall come to pass, I am gone from you, that the Spirit of the Lord will carry you to a place I do not know. So when I go and tell Ahab, and he cannot find you, he will kill me. But I, your servant, have feared the Lord from my youth. Was it not reported to my lord that what I did when Jezebel killed the prophets of the Lord, how I hid 100 men of the Lord's prophets, 50 to a cave, and fed them with bread and water? And now you say, go tell your master Elijah is here. He will kill me. Then Elijah said, the Lord of hosts lives, before whom I stand. I will surely present myself to him today. So Obadiah went to meet Ahab and told him, and Ahab went to meet Elijah. Then it happened when Ahab saw Elijah that Ahab said to him, is that you, O troubler of Israel? And he answered, I have not troubled Israel, but you and your father's house have, in that you have forsaken the commandments of the Lord and have followed the Baals. Now therefore send and gather all Israel to me on Mount Carmel, the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah, who eat at Jezebel's table. So Ahab sent for all the children of Israel and gathered the prophets together on Mount Carmel. And Elijah came to all the people and said, how long will you falter between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him, but if Baal, follow him. But the people answered him not a word. Then Elijah said to the people, I alone am left a prophet of the Lord, but Baal's prophets are 450 men. Therefore let them give us 2 bulls, and let them choose 1 bull for themselves. Cut it in pieces and lay on the wood, but put no fire. And I will prepare the other bull and lay on the wood, but put no fire. Then you call on the name of your gods, and I will call on the name of the Lord. And the God who answers by fire, he is God. So all the people answered and said, it is well spoken. Now Elijah said to the prophets of Baal, choose 1 bull for yourselves and prepare first, for you are many, and call on the name of your God, but put no fire. So they took the bull which was given them, and they prepared, and called on the name of Baal from morning even till noon, saying, O Baal, hear us. But there was no voice, no one answered. Then they leaped about the altar which they had made. And so it was at noon that Elijah mocked them and said, cry aloud, for he is a god. Either he is meditating, or he is busy, or he is on a journey, or perhaps he is sleeping and must be awakened. So they cried aloud and cut themselves, as was their custom, with knives and lances, until the blood gushed out on them. And when midday was past, they prophesied until the time of the offering of the sacrifice. But there was no voice, no one answered, no one paid attention. Then Elijah said to all the people, come near to me. So all the people came near to him, and he repaired the altar of the Lord, broken down. And Elijah took 12 stones, according to the number of the tribes of the sons of Jacob, to whom the word of the Lord had come, saying, Israel shall be your name. Then with the stones he built an altar in the name of the Lord, and he made a trench around the altar, large enough to hold 2 seahs of seed. He put the wood in order, cut the bull in pieces, and laid on the wood, and said, fill 4 water pots with water, and pour on the burnt sacrifice and on the wood. Then he said, do it a second time, and they did it a second time. And he answered, do a third time, and they did a third time. So the water ran all around the altar, and he also filled the trench with water. And it came to pass at the offering of the sacrifice that Elijah the prophet came near and said, Lord God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, let it be known this day that you are God in Israel, and I, your servant, and I have done all these things at your word. Hear me, O Lord, hear me, that this people may know that you are the Lord God, and that you have turned their hearts back again. Then the fire of the Lord fell and consumed the burnt sacrifice, and the wood, and the stones, and the dust, and it licked up the water that was in the trench. Now when all the people saw, they fell on their faces, and they said, the Lord, he is God, the Lord, he is God. And Elijah said to them, seize the prophets of Baal, do not let one of them escape. So they seized them, and Elijah brought them down to the brook Kishon and executed them there. Then Elijah said to Ahab, go up, eat and drink, for the sound of abundance of rain. So Ahab went up to eat and drink, and Elijah went up to the top of Carmel. Then he bowed down on the ground and put his face between his knees and said to his servant, go up now, look toward the sea. So he went up and looked and said, there is nothing. 7 times he said, go again. Then it came to pass the 7th time that he said, there is a cloud as small as a man's hand rising out of the sea. So he said, go up, say to Ahab, prepare, and go down before the rain stops you. Now it happened in the meantime that the sky became black with clouds and wind, and there was heavy rain. So Ahab rode away and went to Jezreel. Okay, so it was long, but I read the whole thing because I believe that this may be part of the original book of Obadiah. Then you go to 2 Kings, which is a shorter account, and it has Now Ahaziah fell through the lattice of his upper room in Samaria and was injured. So he sent messengers and said to them, "Go, inquire of Baal-zebub, the god of Ekron, whether I shall recover from this injury." But the angel of the Lord said to Elijah the Tishbite, "Arise, go up to meet the messengers of the king of Samaria, and say to them, because there is no God in Israel, you are going to inquire of Baal-zebub, the god of Ekron? Now therefore, thus says the Lord, you shall not come down from the bed to which you have gone up, but you shall surely die." So Elijah departed. When the messengers returned to him, he said to them, "Why have you come back?" So they said to him, "A man came up to meet us and said to us, Go, return to the king who sent you, and say to him, Thus says the Lord, because there is no God in Israel, you are sending to inquire of Baal-zebub, the god of Ekron? Therefore you shall not come down from the bed to which you have gone up, but you shall surely." Then he said to them, "What kind of man who came up to meet you and told you these words?" So they answered him, "A hairy man wearing a leather belt around his waist." And he said, "It is Elijah the Tishbite." Then the king sent to him a captain of 50 with his 50 men. So he went up to him, and there he was, sitting on the top of a hill. And he spoke to him, "Man of God, the king has said, come down." So Elijah answered and said to the captain of 50, "If I am a man of God, then let fire come down from heaven and consume you and your 50 men." And fire came down from heaven and consumed him and his 50. Then he sent to him another captain of 50 with his 50 men. And he answered and said to him, "Man of God, thus has the king said, come down quickly." So Elijah answered and said to them, "If I am a man of God, let fire come down from heaven and consume you and your 50 men." And the fire of God came down from heaven and consumed him and his 50. Again, he sent a third captain of 50 with his 50 men. And the third captain of 50 went up and came and fell on his knees before Elijah and pleaded with him and said to him, "Man of God, please let my life and the life of these 50 servants of yours be precious in your sight. Look, fire has come down from heaven and burned up the first two captains of 50s with their 50s, but let my life now be precious in your sight." And the angel of the Lord said to Elijah, "Go down with him, do not be afraid of him." So he arose and went down with him to the king. Then he said to him, "Thus says the Lord, because you have sent messengers to inquire of Baal-zebub, the god of Ekron, because no God in Israel to inquire of his word, therefore you shall not come down from the bed to which you have gone up, but you shall surely die." So he died according to the word of the Lord which Elijah had spoken. Because he had no son, Joram became king in his place in the second year of Jehoram, the son of Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah. Now the rest of the acts of Ahaziah, which he did, they're not written in the book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Israel. Okay, so those are the two passages that I believe were originally part of the book of Obadiah, and in a longer, more unique form from Obadiah's perspective. And the man in this, the third captain, as I said, the Orthodox Church tradition identifies that as Obadiah. Furthermore, Orthodox tradition, the Orthodox Church has their tradition that Obadiah is the same Obadiah in chapter 18 of 1 Kings, and the rabbinic testimony, rabbinic tradition, so the Orthodox Jews have that same Talmudic tradition that Obadiah is the same Obadiah mentioned in 1 Kings chapter 18. So when you put that together, there's some good evidence that that is in fact Obadiah. And right here we've got, as I said, from the Lives of the Prophets, he was that third captain of 50. If this is information from the Apocryphal book of Obadiah, then we have to take that seriously and believe that Apocryphal book had that account in it. All the other prophets have Apocrypha stuff in it from their Apocrypha books. We have to assume the same is applying to Obadiah. So this is a good reason, good evidence. Furthermore, we have something interesting. Like, for example, you say, we take the book of Jonah and we see Jonah, there's barely any prophecies in the book of Jonah, And it's so different from all the other books of the prophets. What happened with the book of Jonah? Where are Jonah's other prophecies? Some people might say, well, Jonah didn't do any other prophecies. Well, according to 2 Kings, Jonah did do other prophecies, where it says right here, he restored the territory of Israel from the entrance of the Arabah, according to the word of the Lord God of Israel, which he had spoken through his servant Jonah the son of Amittai, the prophet who was from Gath-Hepher. What that's saying is an event in the kingdom of Israel was prophesied, territorial changes were prophesied by Jonah. We have no indication of that in our book of Jonah. But these people casually mention this as if it's understood, and people know, oh yeah, it was spoken through Jonah, the son of Amittai, the prophet. As you guys know, basically, is the implication. So their readers, they knew that their readers would be familiar with this information about Jonah, where they're getting their source from. So there had to be another book of Jonah where they got the source of that prophecy from. In the same way, we look at Obadiah, and Obadiah is a single tiny book with one prophecy, super small, only to Edom. If Obadiah was truly a prophet of God, it's impossible that he only had one prophecy, and it wasn't even to Israel. It was a prophecy solely to Edom. It doesn't make sense. This has to be an excerpt from a longer book of Obadiah. Whoever made this book of the 12 prophets, we know that in ancient times we have good evidence that what's called the minor prophets, 12 different prophet books, were put together in a single book. So whoever started that original compilation and gathered those 12 books together, they must have edited the 12 books to make it fit their idea of what they wanted the entire book's theme to be. So parts of the book of Obadiah, which they thought were irrelevant to the main thrust of the book of the 12 prophets that they wanted to create, they simply removed that stuff and just extracted the vision of Obadiah about Edom, because they wanted something about Edom in the book. That makes the most sense of what we see here. Something else too, which I want to get into in a minute, is Jeremiah. The evidence of Jeremiah is very compelling. But so before I give that compelling evidence, I'm just going to read from the two versions of Obadiah. The first version is, I'm going to read from the King James Version. You're going to see what it looks like in the standard translation based on the traditional Masoretic text Hebrew. And the Septuagint is mostly the same, but sometimes the translation differs. But so I'm going to read from the King James because that's considered by a lot of people is considered the standard English, and it's one of the only ones in public domain, and it has a very high popularity in many parts of the English-speaking world. Some people view it essentially as the perfect, infallible Word of God, a flawless copy of the original, a perfect, inspired translation. But we know that the original translators of the King James did not believe that their translation was perfectly inspired. They knew their translation was flawed. They were just writing as men and did the best that they could at the time. They tried to do the best that they could. So, but I'm going to use that as the foundation model so you can see how radically different I have altered it through my new version. So, the vision of Obadiah. Thus saith the Lord God concerning Edom. We have heard a rumor from the Lord, and an ambassador is sent among the heathen. Arise ye, and let us rise up against her in battle. Behold, I have made thee small among the heathen. Thou art greatly despised. The pride of thine heart hath deceived thee, thou that dwellest in the clefts of the rock, whose habitation is high, that saith in his heart, who shall bring me down to the ground? Though thou exalt as the eagle, and though thou set thy nest among the stars, thence will I bring thee down, saith the Lord. If thieves came to thee, if robbers by night, how art thou cut off? Would they not have stolen till they had enough? If the grape gatherers came to thee, would they not leave grapes? How are the things of Esau searched out? How are his hidden things sought up? All the men of thy confederacy have brought thee to the border. The men that were at peace with thee have deceived thee, prevailed against thee. Thy bread has laid a wound under thee. There was none understanding in him. Shall I not in that day, saith the Lord, even destroy the wise out of Edom, and understanding out of the mount of Esau? And thy mighty ones, O Teman, shall be dismayed, to the end that every one of the mount of Esau may be cut off by slaughter. For violence against thy brother Jacob shame shall cover thee, and thou shalt be cut off forever. In the day that thou stoodest on the other side, in the day that the strangers carried away captive his forces, and foreigners entered into his gates, and cast lots upon Jerusalem, even thou wast as one of them. But thou shouldst not have looked on the day of thy brother in the day that he became a stranger, neither shouldst thou have rejoiced over the children of Judah in the day of their destruction, neither shouldst thou have spoken proudly in the day of distress. Thou shouldst not have entered into the gate of my people in the day of their calamity. Yea, thou shouldst not have looked on their affliction in the day of their calamity, nor have laid on their substance in the day of their calamity. Neither shouldst thou have stood in the crossway to cut off those of his that did escape. Neither shouldst thou have delivered up those of his that did remain in the day of distress. For the day of the Lord is near upon all the heathen. As thou hast done, it shall be done unto thee. Thy reward shall return upon thine own head. For as ye have drunk upon my holy mountains, so shall all the heathen drink continually. They shall drink, and they shall swallow down, and they shall be as though they had not been. But upon Mount Zion shall be deliverance, and there shall be holiness, and the house of Jacob shall possess their possessions. And the house of Jacob shall be a fire, and the house of Joseph a flame, and the house of Esau for stubble. And they shall kindle in them, and devour them. And there shall not be remaining of the house of Esau, for the Lord hath spoken. And the south shall possess the mount of Esau, and the plain the Philistines, and they shall possess the fields of Ephraim, and the fields of Samaria, and Benjamin, Gilead. And the captivity of this host and of the children of Israel, that of the Canaanites, unto Zarephath, and the captivity of Jerusalem, which is in Zepharad, shall possess the cities of the south. And saviors shall come up on Mount Zion to judge the mount of Esau, and the kingdom shall be the Lord's. So that's the King James Version. Now I'm going to read to you my very unique version, okay? And I'll explain all these different, what all these different markings are, so you can understand more clearly. But so, containing vision of Obadiah, extracted from the lost book of Obadiah. I heard a report from Yahweh, and he has sent a message within nations. Gather ye together, and come ye against her, and rise ye up to battle. Thus says Yahweh my master to Adum. Behold, I will make thee small within nations, despised with men. Thy pride has elated thee. Fierceness of thine heart has burst within clefts of the rock, seizing strength of a high hill, saying in thy heart, who can bring me down earthward? Though thou soar as an eagle, and though thou set thy nest between luminaries, from there I will bring thee down, declares Yahweh. He will soar as an eagle over Bijara, and spread his wings, and in self-same day the mighty ones of Adum will have a heart like the heart of a woman producing her pain. For I have sworn in me that Bijara will be for a desolation, for a reproach, for a waste, and for a curse, and all her cities shall be for perpetual waste, declares Yahweh. If gatherers came to thee, would they not have left gleanings? If thieves came to thee, if robbers of night, would they not have laid waste sufficing them? how thou wouldst have been cast away, how Esau would be searched out and his hidden things set up. I will make Esau bare. I will uncover his secret places, and he will not be able to hide himself. His neighbors will perish by the hand of his brothers, but it will not be thy orphans will be forsaken. I will preserve them, and thy widows will place their trust upon me. All men of thy covenant will disperse thee and send thee unto thy borders. They will withstand thee. All men of thy peace will prevail against thee and overthrow thee. They will put up their fight and set a snare under thee, for I will bring the calamity of Esau upon him when I will visit him. Flee ye, turn back, dwell deep, O inhabitants of Didon. There will be no understanding in Teman. Shall I not in that self-same day then destroy counsel from Adum, and shall I not cause wisdom to vanish from Mount Esau, declares Yahweh. And thy mighty ones from Teman will be dismayed, to extent that man will be cut off from Mount Esau. From slaughter and from violation of thy brother Yakub, shame will cover thee, and thou shalt be cut off forever. Even thou wast as one of them in day of thy stand from opposition, in day of strangers capturing his force, and foreigners entering his gates, and casting lot upon Jerusalem. And thou shouldst not have spied in day of thy brother Yakub, in day of estrangements, and thou shouldst not have rejoiced towards Judah's sons in day of their destruction, and thou shouldst not have entered the gates of Mount Gion in day of their perishing, and thou shouldst not have magnified thy mouth in day of distress. Thou shouldst not have even entered in gates of the peoples in day of their calamity, and thou shouldst not have even spied within their gathering in day of their destruction. And thou shouldst not have sent in force in day of their perishing, and thou shouldst not have delivered up his remnants in day of distress, and thou shouldst not have even stood upon the crossways to cut off his escapees in day of their calamity. For day of Yahweh will be approaching upon all the nations. As which thou hast done, it will be done unto thee. Thy recompense they will return into thy head. For thus saith Yahweh, though thou art he who maintains innocence, thou shalt not be innocent. For as that thou hast drunken a drink of the cup upon my holy mountain, all the nations shall drink continually upon thy mountain, and they shall drink and swallow down, and they shall be like they have not been. And in Mount Gion and in Jerusalem there will be deliverance, and there will be holiness, and Jacob's house will possess those who possess them. And it shall be Jacob's house will be a fire, and Yushiv's house will be a flame, and Esau's house will be for stubble, and they will kindle in them, and they will consume them. And as Shidum's overthrow and Omurah and their neighbors, there will not be a remnant, for Yahweh has ordered. He will go up as a lion from the swelling of Uridon unto a strong habitation. Therefore I will suddenly make him run away from coming upon her, and those who I have appointed, chosen unto her, so I will suddenly make him run away from coming upon her, and those who I have appointed, chosen unto her. For who is like me, and who can withstand me? And who is this shepherd that stands to my face? Shall not least of the flock be swept off? Shall not their dwellings be made desolate upon them, declares Yahweh? And they in the south will possess Mount Esau, and they in the plain Vilostim, and they will possess Mount Avarim, and Simarun's field, and Benimin, and the Gilad. And captivity of this host for sons of Israel will be that of Kinanim unto Jiravit, and Jerusalem's captivity will be in Shivrid. They will possess cities of the south, and the ones caused to be rescued shall ascend in Mount Gion to judge Mount Esau and the kingdom shall be for Yahweh. I need to get this. That's annoying. Let's see. What did I do? What did I do? Was it simply making it capital? Hold on. All right, I guess it's making it capital. And Mount June, and in Jerusalem there will be deliverance and there will be holiness. Let's see, where was it? And those who I have appointed chosen unto her. All right, so that's sufficient. So anyways, you can see, what in the world am I thinking? What is all this stuff, extra stuff and different stuff? What the heck is going on here? Has Oniah lost his mind? Is he destroying the scriptures? Is he adding to the scriptures? What is he doing? Maybe this is from Satan. Maybe this is not of God, because look how much he's changing the scriptures. Someone might say that. I'm going to try to support my changes that I've made here and where I got this information from. And you're going to see that, you know what, this is actually very plausible. So, but first, before I do that, I'm going to give my preliminary, my reconstructed summary of the Lost Book of Obadiah. And so here's the reconstructed summary of the Lost Book of Obadiah. Obadiah says that he was born in the kingdom of Israel. He was from the region of Shechem of the field of Beth Hakerem. When Obadiah was a young man, he was chosen by King Ahab to serve as his steward. Obadiah records some of Ahab's activities, including an account of his sinful worship. The prophet Elijah is then described as coming to Ahab and causing the rain to stop, and a great famine throughout all the land of Israel occurs as punishment for the corruption of Ahab and his kingdom. After 3 years have passed, Jezebel decides she's going to kill Elijah and his fellow prophets. Obadiah overhears this and warns the prophets ahead of time. Obadiah takes 100 of the prophets into a cave and hides them there, taking care of all their needs while they are hiding. The rest of the prophets seek their own refuge. Ahab seeks for Elijah but cannot find him and punishes anyone who refuses to give him up. The effects of the famine begin to kill off too many of Ahab's animals. As a result, the king asks his servant Obadiah to help him find grass that they can feed their animals with. They split up to save them time in looking for grass. As Obadiah is seeking for grass, he encounters Elijah. Elijah demands that Obadiah enable him to see Ahab. Obadiah is afraid that if he agrees to this, Ahab will kill Obadiah because Elijah will flee and the king will blame Obadiah for Elijah running away. Elijah assures Obadiah that he will not die and that he will confront Ahab that very day. Obadiah goes and reports to Ahab what Elijah said, and Ahab meets with Elijah. Elijah promises to end the famine if Ahab agrees to hold a contest between Elijah and Ahab's prophets. All the people, including Obadiah, gather together to Mount Carmel to watch their contest. They decide that if the gods of Ahab burn Ahab's prophets' offering with fire from the heavens, that Elijah will be killed by the people of Israel, and that if the God of Elijah burns Elijah's offering with fire from the heavens, that Ahab's prophets will be killed by the people of Israel. They pray to their gods, but the gods of Ahab are silent and do not answer. Elijah's God, however, hears Elijah and responds by sending fire from the heavens to burn Elijah's offering. Subsequently, the people of Israel turn to Elijah's God and forsake the gods of Ahab and execute Ahab's prophets. After this, Elijah ends the famine and causes the rain to return in a way that clearly proves to Ahab that it was not a coincidence but was truly caused by Elijah's God. The rain returns and the famine ends. Obadiah continues his service to King Ahab until Ahab dies. Obadiah is appointed as captain by the son of Ahab, Ahaziah, who became king after Ahab dies. Ahaziah gets injured and is about to die. Elijah prophesies to Ahaziah his imminent doom. Ahaziah demands Elijah be brought to him and sends a captain with 50 men to capture Elijah. Elijah summons fire from the heavens to kill the captain and his 50 men. Ahaziah sends a second captain with 50 men to capture Elijah, and Elijah once again summons fire from the heavens to kill the second captain and his 50 men. Ahaziah proceeds to send Obadiah as the third captain with 50 men to capture Elijah, but Obadiah is afraid for his life, seeing the fate of the other captains and men who died in the fire from the heavens. Obadiah begs Elijah to spare his life. Elijah agrees to spare his life and goes with Obadiah willingly to see the king. Elijah tells the king he will die imminently. The king dies. When the king dies, Obadiah stops serving the king and becomes a prophet. Obadiah prophesies during the reigns of Joram and Jehu. In his initial period of his prophecies, he prophesied of the destruction of Ahab's family and the death of the worshippers of Baal. Following this, he was led by God to prophesy against Israel, Judah, Moab, Ammon, Edom, Tyre, Gaza, and Damascus. Obadiah travels to each of these places to deliver his message to them. Obadiah prophesied that each of these people would be punished for their sins and destroyed and sent into exile and judgment. Obadiah prophesies of the return of the exiles of Israel and Judah, the reuniting of the two houses into one. He prophesies of a war in the latter days between Israel and these people groups, and that after this there will be the coming of the Messiah to judge the nations and purify the earth and establish his kingdom. That's what I believe the original book of Obadiah was. Some of this is speculation, but I believe it's very plausible speculation, and I think that this is very close to the original. This is a very close framework and outline of the original text of the lost book of Obadiah. So our book of Obadiah, of this whole thing, it's only this little tiny part right here, a special vision prophecy given specifically to the people of Edom. So now I'm going to give some evidence to back this stuff up. The best evidence is when passages of other parts of the Bible are quoting from a book. And we have other books which are quoting and appealing to the book of Obadiah. And that's compelling evidence of different readings. So now let's start with, for example, Joel. Joel has an interesting reading. It says, "And it shall come to pass, whoever shall call on the name of the Lord shall be delivered. For in Mount Zion and in Jerusalem shall be deliverance, as the Lord hath said." But when we look at Obadiah 1, verse 17, it says, "But upon Mount Zion shall be deliverance." And when you look at the Hebrew, it's the same exact Hebrew. It could be coincidence, but more likely, Joel is quoting the book of Obadiah. And he's even claiming that he's quoting because he says, "as the Lord hath said," meaning as the Lord hath said before. And now I'm reminding you that that's what the Lord has said. So he's quoting, "For in Mount Zion and in Jerusalem shall be deliverance." The same Hebrew, except there's one extra portion of it. The portion that's extra is "and in Jerusalem." It's not in the Obadiah version. This is "upon Mount Zion shall be deliverance." This is "in Mount Zion and in Jerusalem shall be deliverance." But when you look at the Hebrew, it's even closer. And the only difference is "in Jerusalem" is not in the Obadiah one. Otherwise, it's the same exact Hebrew. So that's an example of, so that was 117 right here, how I added "and in Jerusalem." I added that from the book of Joel, assuming that that's a quotation of Obadiah. So that's one example. Then we're going to look at Jeremiah, because Jeremiah has amazing quotations. So it starts off saying, "Concerning Edom, thus saith the Lord of hosts, is wisdom no more in Teman? Is counsel perished from the prudent? Is their wisdom vanished? Flee, turn back, dwell deep, O inhabitants of Dedan, for I will bring the calamity of Esau upon him, the time I will visit him. If grape gatherers came to thee, would they not leave gleaning grapes? If thieves by night, they will destroy till they have enough. But I have made Esau bare, I have uncovered his secret places, and he will not be able to hide himself. His seed is spoiled, and his brethren, and his neighbors, and he is not. Leave thy fatherless children, I will preserve alive, and let thy widows trust in me. For thus saith the Lord, behold, they whose judgment was not to drink of the cup have assuredly drunken, and thou art he that art thou he that shall altogether go unpunished? Thou shalt not go unpunished, but thou shalt surely drink of it. For I have sworn by myself, saith the Lord, that Bozrah shall become a desolation, a reproach, a waste, and a curse, and all the cities thereof shall be perpetual wastes. I have heard a rumor from the Lord, and an ambassador is sent unto the heathen. Gather ye together, and come against her. Rise up to the battle. For lo, I will make thee small among the heathen, despised among men. Thy terribleness hath deceived thee, the pride of thine heart, O thou that dwellest in the clefts of the rock, that holdest the height of the hill. Though thou shouldst make thy nest as high as the eagle, I will bring thee down from thence, saith the Lord. Also Edom shall be a desolation, every one that goeth by it shall be astonished, and shall hiss at all the plagues thereof. As in the overthrow of Sodom and Gomorrah and the neighbor cities thereof, saith the Lord, no man shall abide there, neither shall a son of man dwell in it. Behold, he shall come up like a lion from the swelling of Jordan, against the habitation of the strong. But I will suddenly make him run away from her. And who is a chosen one that I may appoint over her? For who is like me, and who will appoint me the time? And who is the shepherd that will stand before me? Therefore hear the counsel of the Lord, that he hath taken against Edom, and his purposes, that he hath purposed against the inhabitants of Teman. Surely the least of the flock shall draw them out. Surely he shall make their habitations desolate with them. The earth is moved at the noise of their fall. At the cry, the noise thereof was heard in the Red Sea. Behold, he shall come up and fly as the eagle, and spread his wings over Bozrah. And at that day shall the heart of the mighty man of Edom be as the heart of a woman in her pangs. I'm going to take a small break here. Okay, so that's some amazing stuff right here, because it's so clear that Jeremiah is quoting the book of Obadiah. Examples of clear quotations are, I'll give you a couple examples here again, highlighting it. The grape gatherers and the thieves corresponds with Obadiah 1:5. If thieves came to thee, robbers by night. Grape gatherers. And you've got I have heard a rumor from the Lord, and an ambassador is sent unto the heathen. Gather you together and come against her, rise up to the battle. Compare that to thus saith the Lord God. We have heard a rumor from the Lord, and an ambassador is sent among the heathen. Arise ye, and let us rise up against her in battle. Hold on a second. All right, so I'm back. So as you can see, if these came to the grapes, compares very well with this. Then you have the beginning section. We have heard a rumor from the Lord. Ambassador is sent from the heathen. Arise ye, and let us rise up against her in battle. Goes very well with this. I have heard a rumor from the Lord, an ambassador is sent unto the heathen. Gather you together and come against her and rise up to the battle. Slight differences. So that is where I actually get this first initial reading from. It's gather ye together and come ye against her and rise ye up to battle, as opposed to Obadiah's reading. We have heard a rumor from the Lord, an ambassador is sent among the heathen. Arise ye, and let us rise up against her in battle. So let's look at the Hebrew here. Arise thee, and let us rise up against her in battle. It's using the same verb twice, which is very abnormal in Hebrew literature. Jeremiah preserves it more sensibly, where it has different verbs having a similar meaning. So we have in Jeremiah, and remember, Jeremiah is quoting this, says, I have heard a rumor from, so that's, I put the I there. I've heard a rumor from the Lord, and an ambassador is sent unto the heathen. Gather ye together and come against her and rise up to the battle. So 3 different verbs: gather, come against her, which is in Obadiah and Jeremiah, and then rise to the battle. And also, to give you an idea, anywhere in the King James Version where they translate the, but the is not actually part of the Hebrew text, I remove that from the translation because I want to be as closest to the Hebrew as I possibly can. And I don't think we should be adding those when they're not in the actual text. So that's also a unique feature I have in my version that differs from most versions. Most versions add those in places they're not actually part of the text. And sometimes that can actually change the meaning. Now, also, something to let you know, this reading of I instead of we is not only found in Jeremiah, it's also supported in the Septuagint version of Obadiah. Septuagint, thus saith the Lord God to Idumea, I have heard a report. So that's why you see, to give you some information here, if something's underlined, that means it's extra stuff or different stuff, not in our version of the King James Version of the book of Obadiah. If it's italicized, that means it's not in any manuscripts of the book of Obadiah, but I have reconstructed it using parallel sources. Often the book of Jeremiah, sometimes the same book of Obadiah itself by implications. I have added it, or parallelism of the same book. Now, you got this special black background and white font. I use that to indicate that the reading was found in Dead Sea Scroll fragments. So all these parts you'll see are found in Dead Sea Scroll fragments. It's hard to see, but this is also an extra word or extra prefix not in the Masoretic or the Septuagint. They translate it in other translations as in vision of Obadiah, but obviously in vision doesn't make sense, but containing, which is also a good translation of the prefix bet, containing vision of Obadiah makes more sense. You'll also see I have my unique pronunciation spelling, but that's just how I spell it. Also, I'm going to change right now to how I actually pronounce this as Bijara instead of Bijara. Let's see, where are the other ones? Oh, Mount Jiun. Okay. And Jiravit. I gotta fix this. Let's try. All right, I'll try this. And that this hosts captivity for sons of Israel will be that of Kinuni. All right, there, that's better. All right. So anyways, so you can kind of see how I do that. This initial this initial verse is very close to Obadiah and Jeremiah quotation, but it's different enough. But Jeremiah's rendering is more authentic, more ancient, it appears. So that's why I use Jeremiah's version instead. Now, if it's bolded and underlined, that means it's from the Septuagint, and it's extra stuff found in the Septuagint and not in the Masoretic, the Hebrew manuscript of Obadiah. So that's why I have this as bolded and not italicized, because it actually is supported in the Septuagint version. And again, as I said, it's also supported in Jeremiah's quotation. Now we go to the next line, and that is Obadiah 1 verse 2. I have made thee small among the heathen, thou art greatly despised. Compared to, for lo, I will make thee small among the heathen, despised among men. It's mostly the same, slightly different Hebrew, but at the very end, it's quite different. This one is despised thou greatly. And here we have despised in or among mankind. Now, as I showed the other time in the other video, I showed that this word right here, so if you take away this letter and you have just this letter with two words, it in Hebrew has different meanings. One of the meanings is direct object marker, but another meaning, it's an actual word. It's a preposition that means with. This bet preposition often is translated in, but it sometimes has the meaning of with as well. So it seems evident that the original meaning was with and not thou. So the hey should be removed, and the original should be simply aleph tav, meaning with, and the bet should not be there, and it should be aleph tav as well. So Jeremiah has updated the Hebrew to make it more modernized, but otherwise it preserves the original meaning, whereas Obadiah corrupts the original meaning. You compare this, it has the same three letters as these, just in one letter is at the end. So this is A, D, M, Aleph, Dalet, Mem. And in Obadiah, it's Mem, Aleph, Dalet. So Mem is at the beginning here, and Mem is at the end in this one. As I explained in the other video, it's very explainable, plausibly, as a scribal error. In fact, that's the only way to explain it. It's clear that Jeremiah is quoting the book of Obadiah. But when you look at the context, thou art greatly despised is highly nonsensical. It doesn't make much sense as a rendering, but this makes sense by the context. Despised among men. So I use Jeremiah once again to reconstruct verse 2. That's why you have with men underlined and italicized. Furthermore comes Jeremiah 49:16. Thy terribleness hath deceived thee, the pride of thine heart, O thou that dwellest in the clefts of the rock, that holdest the height of the hill. Though thou shouldst make thy nest as high as the eagle, I will bring thee down from thence, saith the Lord. Now you compare to Obadiah. The pride of thine heart hath deceived thee, thou that dwellest in the clefts of the rock, whose habitation is high, that saith in his heart, who shall bring me down to the ground? Though thou exalt as the eagle, and though thou set thy nest among the stars, thence will I bring thee down, saith the Lord. So now we look and we see I use Jeremiah once again. There's some differences, but it's clearly the same. Obadiah is clearly being quoted by Jeremiah. So we look at how Jeremiah renders it, and that's how I render it. Thy pride has elated, and this is an Aleph Tav. There's an extra Aleph Tav not in Jeremiah. That's not in the book of Obadiah. See right here, Jeremiah has Aleph Tav thee, whereas Obadiah just has thee, no Aleph Tav. So I indicate Aleph Tav by a colon. That's why whenever you see colons, except this one right here, but most of the time when you see a colon, that is the Aleph Tav that I have rendered. And contrary to popular belief among some Messianics, the Aleph Tav does not refer to the Messiah. It's not a special meaning at all. All it means is a direct object marker, direct definite object marker. It's simply a grammatical marker. And that's why they don't translate it, because English doesn't need that marker. But Hebrew does need that marker for it to make sense in certain passages. So anyway, so that's an indication that, so Jeremiah has that. Then fierceness of thine heart. And Jeremiah has an extra the, not in the Obadiah text. And it renders the clause differently. So let's see here. Also, the Septuagint of Jeremiah sometimes renders it a little bit differently. So I often consulted the Septuagint translation to see how it compared to the Masoretic translation of Jeremiah. And there was, let's see, the fierceness of thine heart, so that's what I have, fierceness of thine heart. And insolence is a synonym of pride. So I followed the Septuagint there, essentially. And seizing strength of a high hill. See, right here, seize upon the strength of a lofty hill. I chose to use high because it's the same word in the Obadiah text, and the Masoretic text translates it as high, so I decided to render it the same way to make that clear. Now, this clause is not in the Jeremiah section, but it makes sense that Jeremiah wouldn't quote it because it's not needed. It's not necessary to make the point that Jeremiah is trying to make. So it makes sense why Jeremiah would omit this part of the quotation. But if he had quoted it, I believe that instead of saying in his heart, it would have said saying in thy heart, because otherwise it doesn't make sense grammatically. Also, it didn't seem like it made sense grammatically. Who can bring me down earth? That's what the Hebrew text literally says. Who can bring me down earth? It's clearly saying bringing down to earth. Let's see where we got it. Who can bring me down to the ground? That's how they translate it in the King James. But when you look at the actual Hebrew text, who bring me earth, or who bring me down, excuse me, who down bring me earth. But it's supposed to be down to earth. So, but there's no prefix for the lamed to say to. There's no preposition such as unto. It just says down earth. Now, it's very likely that there was a hey at the end of this. And when you have a hey at the end of a word, sometimes it is a directional, a locative case, which basically means it gives the location, and is a good translation of it is the word, the English phrase word, W-A-R-D. So northwards, southwards, westwards, the words section means directed towards. So that's why I render it as earthward, because it makes sense. A scribe would see the word in Hebrew, eretz, with a hey at the end, and they'd say, wait a minute, eretz is not supposed to have a hey at the end, because it's not. Even though it's a feminine word, it does not have the hey at the end, like most feminine words. So the scribe probably was like, okay, this doesn't make sense. I got to remove the hey. But he didn't realize that it wasn't a feminine marking. It was a locative marking. So that's what I believe happened. So that's why I have who can bring me down earthward. It makes more sense grammatically. Now right here, this is supported by the Septuagint and the Dead Sea Scroll manuscript, the fragment. The Hebrew of the Masoretic simply has and though set. It doesn't say thou set, but by the context of grammatically, it makes more sense to have that word thou as we have in the Septuagint and the Dead Sea Scroll fragment. Jeremiah, however, seems to be corrupted in how it words it, for it says, though thou shouldst exalt, for if you exalt as an eagle thy nest, but it's claimed to be quoting from Obadiah. So when we look at Obadiah, we see the original is, though should exalt as an eagle, and though between stars thou set thy nest. But instead, the Jeremiah text removes an entire clause, most of the second clause, making it read nonsensically a false grammar as, if you exalt as an eagle thy nest. It doesn't make sense grammatically in the Hebrew. It's as if you exalt as an eagle, a nest is not exalted, but an eagle exalts. So if you exalt as an eagle, stop, new clause, and if between stars, set thy nest. So it's clearly two different things. The nest of the eagle is not exalted. The eagle exalts, but setting your nests between the stars is exalted. Again, an eagle does not have his nest exalted. So that's why we know the Jeremiah text there is not accurate, in that a clause must have fell out from the Jeremiah text. Now here's the controversial rendering that I have, and I incorporate at the end, Jeremiah, verse 22, behold, he shall come up and fly as the eagle, and spread his wings over Basra. And at that day shall the heart of the mighty men of Edom be as the heart of a woman in her pangs. Now, let's see, hold on. Before I get to that, let me just see if there was any other thing. Well, the other one I wanted to get to that I covered already, but I'll say it one more time, is this one, if grave gatherers came to thee. You see, in Obadiah, it's in a different order. It's, if thieves came to thee, if robbers by night, would they not have stolen till they had enough? If grave gatherers came to thee, but it's reversed here, it's in Jeremiah's quotation, it's great. If grave gatherers came to thee, if thieves by night, it appears Jeremiah is simply simplifying it, and that probably was how the original Jeremiah read. Since Jeremiah is alluding sometimes to the original text and not always quoting it, he can change the text a little bit, so long as it's preserving the same basic message. So you see, if thieves came to thee, if robbers by night, Jeremiah was like, okay, the main point is if thieves by night. Now, they will destroy till they have enough. I rendered that as, where was it? Laid waste. Laid waste in the sense of depleting an area. Laid waste, not destroying necessarily. So I think the translation as destroy is a little probably not correct, but the Hebrew of Jeremiah is correct. Just should be translated like laid waste. When you look, it says, well, they have not stolen until they had enough. It uses the word stolen again. Well, it has thieves, stealers, and then the same word as a verb. So if you take a look, genabim, thieves, and then genab, which is would they not have stolen? Igenabu. So, but in Jeremiah, there is not, this word is not there. Instead, it's the word for destruction. Here. Esihitu, they will destroy till they have enough. This is basically sufficiency of them. So you could translate it as sufficiency of them or their sufficiency. That's why I translate it as their sufficiency, or I translate it as sufficing them. When you look at how they translate it, they have till they have enough and till they had enough. It's clearly not a literal translation, and a literal translation, as I said, I prefer literal. So anyway, so that's how I do line 5. But what this confirms to us is, so far what we have confirmed by comparing Jeremiah's quotations of Obadiah to our current copies of Obadiah, is that the original form of Obadiah had extra words in these verses, often altered words different, which means something similar, and sometimes the clauses were in a different order. That's why I changed some of the clauses sometimes, because the way the clauses are in Obadiah doesn't make sense in certain places. Like when it starts out, thus saith the Lord God concerning Edom, we have heard a rumor from the Lord, and an ambassador is sent among the heathen. Arise ye, and let us rise up against her in battle. Behold, I have made thee small among the heathen. So right here, we have heard a rumor from the Lord. That's not the Lord talking. Even though it just said, thus saith the Lord God concerning Edom, we have heard a rumor from the Lord. But that's, again, it's not the Lord talking. So we know that that's not correct. The clause should be somewhere else. And I believe the clause should be after verse 1 and not at the beginning of verse 1. So I put, thus says the Lord God concerning Edom, at the beginning of verse 2. So now it makes more sense, and it says, I heard a report from Yahweh, and he has sent a message within nations. Gather you together and come ye against her, and rise ye up to battle. So that's Obadiah speaking. Now, still Obadiah speaking, thus says Yahweh my master to Adum. And now Yahweh starts speaking, being quoted. Behold, I will make thee small within nations, despised with men. Thy pride has elated thee. Fierceness of thine heart has burst within clefts of the rock. Seizing strength of a high hill, saying in thy heart, who can bring me down earthward? Though thou soar as an eagle, and though thou soar thy nest between luminaries, from there I will bring thee down, declares Yahweh. Now, once again, I rearranged stuff because in no, I don't this time, but later on I do. So my bad. But so, yeah, declares Yahweh at the end. So that means that here, now it's Obadiah talking again. But I add a controversial section, which may not be part of the actual text. But the reason I think it is because when you look at Jeremiah's section, he quotes stuff without intervening. Like, okay, so this is an exact quotation, essentially, of Obadiah. then comes this, and it's not in our text. Same thing right here. Then we have this, for I have sworn by myself, saith the Lord, that Bozrah shall become a desolation, a reproach, a waste, and a curse, and all the cities thereof shall be perpetual waste. I have heard a rumor from the Lord. And then it just quotes. So verses 14 to 16 is an exact quotation all in a row of Obadiah's text. But Jeremiah presents this same message as being connected with Bozrah. So the way Jeremiah is presenting it, he's implying that he's still quoting or paraphrasing Obadiah's book talking about Bozrah. So there had to be something about Bozrah nearby in the book of Obadiah originally. But simply saying, for I have sworn in me that, or let's see how they render it. Simply saying, hold on. Simply saying, for I have sworn by myself, saith the Lord, that Bozrah shall become a desolation, a reproach, a waste, and a curse, and all the cities thereof shall be perpetual wastes. That, if you put that in here by itself, it doesn't make much sense. It's kind of unclear where you would put that. However, because we have at the very end this very interesting section of, behold, he shall come up and fly as the eagle and spread his wings over Bozrah. It's talking about Yahuwah, God, come up and fly as the eagle and spread his wings over Bozrah. I believe that is clear allusion, either a paraphrase or a quotation of what Obadiah actually said connected with the eagle thing. He uses the eagle metaphor for Edom. If Edom soars as an eagle, it will be brought down. Now, Jeremiah is saying, but Yahuwah, he will soar as an eagle over Bozrah or Bijarah and spread his wings. And in the self-same day, the mighty ones of Edom, will have a heart like the heart of a woman producing her pain, which means a woman giving birth who is in a lot of pain and anguish and anxiety and fear. So that's what it's going to be like. And then now, see, that flows. So you have the eagle, and then he's saying, but God will be the eagle. And now he's quoting God actually speaking regarding Bozrah. For I have sworn in me that Bozrah will be for desolation, for a reproach, for a waste, and for a curse, and all her cities shall be for perpetual waste, declares Yahuwah. So that flows very well. And then the whole idea of becoming perpetual waste, desolation, flows right into the next part about if gatherers came to thee. Now what this is saying, because sometimes it was confusing when I was reading it before, but what it's saying is, if gatherers came to thee, would they not have left gleanings? What that means is mere gleanings. A gleaning is like they harvest and leave little bits for you. So they're saying if gatherers came, they would have left barely anything for you. So you would have had most of your stuff taken away, just gleanings left. If thieves came to thee, if robbers of night, would they not have laid waste, sufficing them? So they would have taken as much as they wanted, as much as sufficed them. Then how thou wouldst have been cast away. And then how Esau, and I render it, Esau, would be searched out and his hidden things sought up. Now, if we've already established the possibility that something like this could happen and that an extra clause could be in there, this is also very highly likely to be in this area. The reason is we look, again, as a quotation, it just passes through. But I have made Esau bare. I have covered. Scholars note that this is very similar in idea and somewhat a little bit of the language with verse 6 of Obadiah. So it's clear that verse 6 is connected. And I believe that this originally came immediately after. So it read, how Esau would be searched out. Oops, didn't think that up. And now it's saying the same exact thing, but God speaking. I will make Esau bare. I will uncover his secret places, and he will not be able to hide himself. His neighbors will perish by the hand of his brothers, but it will not be thy orphans will be forsaken. I will preserve them, and thy widows will place their trust upon me. Now, you can see why this might have been removed, because it's actually a merciful thing for Edom. So maybe they didn't like Edom, and they didn't want Edom to get the idea that the judgment wasn't as harsh as it was going to be. So they might have removed that. The scribes might have removed it from the book of Obadiah. Also, because it's so similar, you can see why, okay, maybe a scribe would remove it because it's saying essentially the same thing. When Jeremiah is quoting, he doesn't need to quote both lines. He can quote the words primarily that God speaks of himself. Also, something to keep in mind, as I said, the Septuagint sometimes translates it differently. So when we look at Jeremiah, we see, for I have stripped Esau, I have uncovered their secret places. They shall have no power to hide themselves. They have perished by the hand of his brother, my neighbor, and it is impossible for thy fatherless one to be left to live, but I shall live, and the widows trust in me. The other Septuagint translation I used says something very similar, but instead of my neighbor, it says his neighbor. And it also seems to imply that the orphan will not survive, but the widows will. That does not make sense. It makes more sense. You see in the prophets that the orphan and the widows are treated similarly. So God would leave both to live, the orphan and the widow. So it makes more sense, especially when you look at the Masoretic text rendering, how they translate it. Leave thy fatherless children, I will preserve alive, and let thy widows trust in me. So in this rendering, it's an indication that it is a positive thing. Now, on the other token, the scribe could have been like, that's pretty harsh to say that the orphans are going to not be preserving. We need to remove that so people don't think God's horrible for showing favor on the widows, but not the orphans, because they might have misunderstood the Hebrew. So it could go either way for the scribes. The scribes could think in either way to justify removing it. Now, I know it can be hard to believe that something like this could happen and that a huge section like this could be removed, but we do see this happen in other books of the Bible. So I put it there with the understanding that it's possible that I'm not accurately rendering this, but it flows so well, and it's not radically different from the message of Scripture. Especially, it corresponds with Jeremiah very well. It's not like I'm making things up out of nowhere. I'm actually using a source that's clearly connected with Obadiah. Definitely connected. So I think it's valid, especially when you see these clauses being connected. Oops, wrong one. Jeremiah, you see the clauses being connected that definitely are quotations. But Jeremiah makes no distinction. So it's clear that Jeremiah seems to be indicating that it's all quotations. No, is that Jeremiah is clearly changing the order of certain sections. Like we got the grape gatherer stuff here, then we have all that other stuff. The beginning of the book of Obadiah comes later. So Jeremiah wasn't trying to quote the entire book of Obadiah from start to finish exactly. He reordered some of the passages to make points, and he elaborated on some of his own ideas. But it was very close to the text of Obadiah in the form that he was using, but with his slight alterations and commentaries here and there, and slight removal of things that he felt weren't necessary to provide. Now, we also look, and we're going to see, oh, and this is from the Septuagint, an extra and. You'll see sometimes the Septuagint has an extra and. Not very significant, but sometimes it can help change the meaning or make it more grammatically correct. Now, we've got here, all men of thy covenant will send thee unto thy border. Septuagint has borders, and very often in the Dead Sea Scrolls, there are plurals which support the Septuagint plurals being different from the Masoretic. So I'm giving the Septuagint the benefit of the doubt and rendering it as a plural on the assumption that the Septuagint is more accurate in that rendering. Now, all men of thy covenant will send thee into thy borders. Since we looked at here and we saw that in the edited version that we have, it's shorter, more condensed, but basically the same idea, just using different verbs, which means slightly different things, but are basically meaning the same thing. I decided is probably the case in verse 7 too. So I added, will disperse thee and send thee into thy borders. I don't have any proof that this clause should be there, but I added it there on the assumption that it was probably fuller in the original version, just like it was in verse 1. Then we've got all men of thy peace will prevail against thee. I'm pretty confident that the all should be there because of parallelism, because at first it's all men of thy covenant. But now it's men of thy peace. Why is it, if it's men of thy peace, then it should be men of thy covenant. The fact that it's all men of thy covenant means it should also be all men of thy peace to be consistent. But the manuscripts don't have all. So I add all to make the parallelism in the Hebrew more clear. And then I add another clause, which means basically the same thing, and overthrow thee. Again, I don't know if that was there, but it fits very well with the idea of a fuller text being condensed. Then also, the way it's worded in the Hebrew is very awkward for verse 7. Now, also the translation is pretty bad because they don't know. The Hebrew was complicated. So right here we got leham, and sometimes that means bread, or that can also mean fight or war, and it's clear by context it's talking about fight and not bread, like the King James Version falsely translates. Then they have laid a wound under thee, no understanding in him. Now, when you look at the Septuagint, we'll see they have set snares under thee, they have no understanding. So I have the set a snare under thee, but then there's their fight. We look at the Hebrew text, their fight. Let's see. Oh, that's right. So the Septuagint, how did it render it? They have set snares under thee, but in the Masoretic it has the wait, let's see, hold on. Oh yeah, so it is they, my bad. So they have set snares under the, that's what we've got. And then their fight, let me see for a second here. I have it as they will put up their fight instead of, I'm just trying to think where I got the they from. They will. Again, so I keep going to the wrong one. All right. Oh, yeah. So I figured there was two. So their fight. No, but again, this is all right. This is what. Let me go to. This is the This is the New English translation of the Septuagint, and I'm just gonna. I want to confirm this for you guys. All right, we're getting close here. All right. All right, so let's see. They have set an ambush beneath you. Okay. I need to change that. Should be thy fight. 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 They will put up thy fight. I think I might have to change that a little bit, but that we'll keep that for now because this actually has thy, and I said there accidentally. But anyways, then I have a clause for I will bring the calamity of Esau upon him when I will visit him. Flee, turn back, dwell deep, O inhabitants of Dedan. I've tried to find where this would best fit if it was actually part of Obadiah, because Jeremiah says this, let's see, calamity right here, and it's supported in this place. It being found here is supported by what comes right before it, because what comes right before it is wisdom no more in Timan? Is counsel perished from the prudent? Is their wisdom vanished? I consider this an allusion to the book of Obadiah, because when you look right after, then comes, there will be no understanding in him. I think it's instead of him, it was probably Timan or Timan. So I change it to be Timan to fit with right here. Is wisdom no more in Timan? And this is a prophecy that one day there will be no wisdom in Timan. So he's saying, has that happened yet? Is wisdom no more in Timan? And then, shall I not in that self-same day then destroy counsel from Edom? And shall I not cause wisdom to vanish from Esau? I changed the words to correspond it, to make the connection with Jeremiah clearer. And as we know, this did happen, like in verse 1, different verbs. Same thing for right here in verse 5, different verb. So this certainly could have happened for right here, verbs being changed out for cancel and vanish. And so that's what you see in the Jeremiah. I use Jeremiah 49:7 to reconstruct the original verbs used in Obadiah's account. But I interpret this as not a quotation, but a allusion. But you can use allusions to reconstruct as well. So that's what I've done here. So God starts talking here, and it keeps going. All men of thy covenant will disperse thee. Okay, thy, thee, thy. So you see it's all second person. Then it goes back to third, Esau, upon him when I will visit him. Now it's addressing a new subject. Flee, turn back to Will Depot, inhabitants of Dedan. The fact that Dedan is also mentioned in other books of the Old Testament in connection with Teman implies that there had to be a reference to Dedan originally in the book of Obadiah. So I include that here, closely connected with Teman. Now, we've got here thy mighty ones from Teman. That comes from the Septuagint. It actually says from in the Septuagint, whereas in Masoretic, it actually says O Teman. No prefix for from, but I believe the Septuagint is the one that's correct. Now, an interesting thing also is they translate here to the end that every one of the mount of Esau may be cut off by slaughter. Here we have to extent that man will be cut off from Mount Esau. And then a new sentence from slaughter and from violation of thy brother Jacob. The and comes from the Septuagint and reflects the Septuagint's altered Hebrew reference. It's the same Hebrew words, but they're split into different sentences. So you've got in the Obadiah account, you have because of the slaughter and the sin of thy brother Jacob. But it means against thy brother Jacob. And it's not, sin is not a good translation of the word. The actual word in Greek and the Hebrew refers more to violation. We look, and what is the word that's used? Violence. It's clear how this word violence is used. It's used to mean violation. So when you look, there's the prefix mem, which means from. So from slaughter and from violation of thy brother Jacob, Yakub, shame will cover thee, and thou shalt be cut off forever. Then I change the order in verse 11, and now I do some interesting thing here. What I noticed is that we see this phrase in day of a lot in these verses. And how it's rendered is it's always at the end of a thought. In day of their destruction. So in day of estrangements, in day of their destruction. So let me show you up here in the King James day. So on the day of thy brother, in the day that he became a stranger, in the day of their destruction, in the day of distress, in the day of their calamity, in the day of their calamity, in the day of their calamity, in the day of distress. So the day of is clearly a parallelism here, and it's at the end of each clause. So I believe that it should be reconstructed in verse 11 to be at the end of the clause as well, to be in parallelism. So that's what I do. So I alter the order to make it more consistent with the later parallel of the verses that follow. So we have, even thou wast as one of them in day of thy stand from opposition. So even thou wast as one of them, I put at the beginning. And then likewise, I have in day of, in day of thy stand from opposition, in day of strangers capturing his force, and foreigners entering his gates, and casting lot upon Jerusalem. Once again, Septuagint has the plural, and I'm giving the Septuagint the benefit of the doubt because many times it is correct and does have the plural when the Masoretic does not. Now, something interesting is in the next line, it's, and thou shouldst not have spied in day of thy brother, in day of estrangements. Again, Septuagint has plural. Also, the Masoretic text has in the day he became a stranger, and in the actual Hebrew has in the day of his estrangement, but in the Septuagint, it's not his estrangement, it's just simply, it's not his, it's just estrangements. Then, from the parallel earlier, thy brother Jacob, I decided it's probable that Jacob should also be added here for the parallel. So I add the word Jacob. And let's see. And we see, at first I thought this was weird because how it's worded, and thou shouldst not have looked in day of thy brother, in day of his estrangement. I thought it was weird that it had in day 2 times, and I was considering removing that as a corruption. But I found that it was supported, the double in day reference was supported in the previous verse, because we have in the previous verse, in day, 2 in a row. So it's just like verse 11 and verse 12. So that's why I realized that it wasn't a corruption. So I kept it. Thou shouldst not have spied in day of thy brother Jacob, in day of estrangements. Now, something also is interesting is the Masoretic has day of calamity 3 times in verse 13. The Septuagint does not. The Septuagint has calamity, destruction, perishing. 3 different verbs, and they wouldn't just translate it differently. It's clear that the actual Hebrew had to be different. And what's significant is that it corresponds with, like for example, destruction. The day of their destruction is up here, so it's repeating. Day of their destruction, it's repeating. Then we've got down here, where is it? In day of distress, which was also mentioned earlier in day of distress. So it's clearly repeating. And again, it's going to be parallelism. So what we see in Hebrew, there's usually 2 different ways of doing this. It's called chiasm, where let's say goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. So it goes up and then goes down. So it goes through a list and then it backtracks through that same list, the same exact items. Or it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So it's a parallelism of the list, the same items of the list mentioned twice, or listing the items up and then listing the items back down in reverse order. And it's called parallelism, and it's very poetic, and you see that a lot throughout in the Hebrew Bible. It's clear that's what's going on here, but there were things that are corrupted And some of the clauses were a little bit out of order to preserve that parallelism, so I had to change the order slightly to fix the parallelism, and I had to add an extra clause. However, we have right here in verse 13 in the Septuagint an extra word, even, and then we've got Masoretic text, into the gate of my people, whereas the Septuagint has in gates of the peoples, not my people, but in gates of the peoples. So Septuagint renders it differently, but I think I always tend to have a bias towards the Septuagint, and I think its reading should be considered, and I'm going to incorporate that as the main reading. Now, let's see, there's another even. Where's the other even? Oh, that's right. In verse 13, we've got this word, which means even you, or even, because Obadiah altered that word from with to thou in this verse, it's possible it did it in other verses too. And I think it did that in this verse, verse 13, even thou. I think it should be even with, without the hey, even with. So even spied within their gathering. The Septuagint translates it as gathering. The translation of the Masoretic text that the King James Version has translates it as evil or affliction. I chose spied because it has a negative connotation, and it helps clarify the meaning of what Obadiah is speaking of. It's an act of war to spy on other nations. So when we have even, now in the Septuagint version, one of the translations I was using also seems to have even in verse 13. Now, because right here, thou shouldst not even spied in their gathering, but look up here, thou shouldst not have spied in day of thy brother. So it's repeating the same verb when it says even. Or when it says even, it's repeating the same verb. So if the Septuagint is actually saying that even was in verse 13, then that means there had to have been a clause which used the same verb idea. But there's not. So I use this idea to reconstruct a missing clause for the parallelism so that it'll be 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And so that's what we see. So we've got destruction, and then thou shalt not have entered the gates of Mount Zion. And not only should you not have entered the gates of Mount Zion, you should not have even entered in gates of the peoples in day of their calamity. Yeah, so he should not have entered into any of the gates of Israel, basically is what he's saying. Not just the gates of Mount Zion, but you shouldn't have even entered in their gates anywhere. It's what he's saying. Also, he's saying you should have not looked at in the day of thy brother, you shouldn't have spied on him. But not only that, you should not have even spied in their gathering in the day of their destruction. And we've also got another even, which seems to be in the Septuagint as well, and it uses the same verb, stood, and look what we had at the beginning of this whole section. We had, even thou wast as one of them in day of thy stand. It's the same Hebrew word. stood, stand. If you look at the Hebrew, it's the same. So it's clearly connected here. And that supports my altered order, because in the actual verse 14, the standing comes first, and then the day of distress comes after. But when you have the day of distress come first, and then the standing come last, that makes more sense, because the standing came at the beginning, it opened the section, and now the standing is closing the section. So it's very parallel there, and that's why I reconstruct it like that. Also, again, I add in day of their calamity to make it correspond with the parallelism for the day of their calamity was up here. So we have day of their destruction, day of their perishing, day of distress, day of their calamity, day of their destruction, day of their perishing, day of distress, day of their calamity. So parallelism right there. Now, also, something interesting is people translate this in verse 12. How they translate it? They translate it as, thou hast spoken proudly. Verse 12, spoken proudly. This is, you have boasted. The actual Hebrew, you have thou shouldst not have magnified thy mouth. So that's a more literal translation. That's why my translation is much more unique, because it actually more literally translates it. So that's a positive aspect of it. And now, so all these days, in day of Jacob's this, day of Jacob's that. But now what happens? Now the day of Yahuwah will be approaching upon all the nations. As which thou hast done, it will be done unto thee. Thy recompense, they will return unto the head. The Dead Sea Scrolls has the they reading, which it's not supported by Septuagint or Masoretic. Now, I also did something interesting. I took the Jeremiah section again, and we've got something interesting. We've got the drink. Two passages about drink, one in Obadiah and one in Jeremiah. So, for as ye have, this is Obadiah, for as ye have drunk upon my holy mountain, so shall all the heathen drink continually. They shall drink, and they shall swallow down, and they shall be as though they had not been. And then we've got in Jeremiah, for thus saith the Lord, behold, they whose judgment was not to drink the cup have assuredly drinking. Art thou he that altogether shall go unpunished? Thou shalt not go unpunished, but thou shalt surely drink. And then it goes right into the Basra passage, and then the passage, the verses which are an express quotation from Jeremiah. So because of that, it implies that there must have been something very similar in the book of Jeremiah. But as I was trying to put this in, I was like, okay, I have a hard time believing that all this stuff was exactly quoted. And it just so happens that none of it's quoted. None of it appears in Obadiah. The things that are quoted in Jeremiah don't appear in Obadiah. That seemed too coincidental. That'd be too much of a coincidence for it to be possible, it seems. I suppose it's a little possible, but it's very unlikely. So, in my view, verse 12 was a condensed, slightly altered version, basically preserving the main thrust of it. So, I reconstructed it as, for thus saith Yahuwah, though thou art he who maintains innocence, thou shalt not be innocent. For as thou hast drunken a drink of the cup upon my holy mountain, all the nations shall drink continually upon thy mountain, and they shall drink and swallow down, and they shall be like they have not been. So I'll explain how I did that. Let's see. So if you look, thou is supported by the Septuagint. In the Masoretic, it has ye, plural. But all throughout it's a singular, but now the Masoretic has, for some strange reason, a plural. But the Septuagint correctly and consistently has the singular thou. So we know that the Septuagint is correct there. Now, so what I did was I took the text of Obadiah as the main text. Then I added parts which are plausibly parallel to what Jeremiah is saying, such as drink of the cup. They have surely drunken, drink of the cup. So I add right here, whereas thou hast drunken a drink of the cup. You can see why a scribe would remove that as being redundant. Upon my holy mountain, all the nations shall drink continually upon my mountain. I add that clause, not from Jeremiah, but because it makes sense in the context. And then that final saying of, art thou he that shall go altogether unpunished? Thou shalt not go unpunished, but thou shalt surely drink. We have, though the literal Hebrew translates accurately very well as, though thou art he who maintains innocence, thou shalt not be innocent. So I put that at the beginning, and so then we have this as Jeremiah's own paraphrase a little bit, speaking from the Lord Yahuwah, quoting Yahuwah, but it's a paraphrase. Yahuwah is paraphrasing his own passage, and then, but thou shalt surely drink. You have, for as thou hast drunk. So this, it should not be translated, thou shalt surely drink. It should be, but thou hast surely drank. That's the better translation. But so you can see, you have surely drunk. That's a condensed, a summary of the fuller text of Obadiah. So that's how I rendered it. I thought that made a lot of sense. So perhaps something like that occurred for up here too. It was slightly different. It might have been paraphrased, but I didn't know how to paraphrase it. The Dedan part and the I've made Esau bear. I didn't know how to paraphrase that, but I knew something similar was probably in the text of Obadiah, so I just quoted it on the plausible basis that it might have actually been in the original text of Obadiah. Now, as I said, verse 17 was supported by Joel's quotation. Then we've got as Sodom's overthrow and Gomorrah and their neighbors. That is a clause that comes from verse 18 of Jeremiah, chapter 49. Now, the reference to Sodom and Gomorrah seems too perfect to not have been part of the original book of Obadiah. So I suspect that that reference was originally part of there. But then you look and you see, saith the Lord. So it seems like this part is being quoted and is then being cut off and is no longer well, no, because then this is speaking, the Lord is speaking here, Yahuwah is speaking there. So, but anyways, I just take this clause, and then this one I take as a paraphrase of what the actual Obadiah text said, which is, there will not be a remnant for Esau's house. And I say that because shortly after, it then has the righteous possessing Mount Esau. So it makes it sound like in Jeremiah, no man shall abide there, neither shall a son of man dwell in it. But right after, we're told that there will be. So that's why I didn't include it, because it didn't seem to flow very well. But Jeremiah, it does well, but it didn't do as well in the text of Obadiah. Then this part I felt was the most awkward for me to put in it, but it still kind of flows somewhat all right. And I decided to include it because I included earlier, he will soar as an eagle. It says, behold, he shall come up and fly as the eagle. So that's what I have right here. But I removed the behold. I think Jeremiah added the behold, possibly. But so if this is correct, and I'm right that the reference to Yahuwah as the eagle is part of the original text, then a reference to Edom as a lion has to also be part of the original text, because it's clearly the same basic idea of using animals to convey ideas. So I just quoted the whole thing. And then we look right here, he says, therefore hear the counsel of the Lord that he hath taken against Edom and his purposes, that he hath purposed against the inhabitants of Teman. Surely the least of the flock shall dwell in them. It seems like it's a quotation. And the quotation fits very well with where it leaves off as the shepherd, because it then talks about the flock. So I put those two clauses together, and it comes up with this. And I translated, like if you look, the way it's worded makes no sense in the King James. I will suddenly make him run away from her. And who is the chosen one that I may appoint over her? For who is like me, and who will appoint me the time? And who is that shepherd that will stand before me? It's very awkward. But I used the Septuagint to translate it better of Jeremiah. And also, I rendered it as who, not as a question, but those who I have appointed. So I'll make him run away from coming upon her, and those who. So I'll make him run away from those who I have appointed, chosen unto her. Now it makes sense grammatically. For who is like me, and who can withstand me? That translation is from the Septuagint. The King James says, who will appoint me the time? Doesn't really make much sense, but Septuagint, who can withstand me? That makes sense. And then we have at the very end, they in the south will possess Mount Usau. And these are from the Septuagint. I think the reference to in is probably authentic and actually part of the Septuagint. This is a Philistines, but I render it in the Hebrew transliteration, Philistine. Mount Ephraim. In the actual Septuagint, it says Mount Ephraim instead of Field of Ephraim. And I think the Septuagint is more accurate in that regard. Now, you also have the Septuagint renders it as Gilead being Benjamin and Gilead being objects rather than Benjamin being a subject. So I decided to go along with that on the assumption the Septuagint was right, and I added the Aleph Tav there, because without the Aleph Tav, Benjamin could not be an object. If there was no Aleph Tav there, Benjamin would have to be a subject of the one doing it. So what this is saying, this little Aleph Tav thing tells us it's basically a substitute for the verb, so they don't have to keep repeating it. So they in the south will possess Mount Esau, and they in the plain will possess, that's what this colon means, go back to that verb, will possess the Philistines, and they will possess Mount Ephraim, and they will possess Samaria's field, and they will possess Benjamin, and they will possess the Gilead. Okay, so that's how it works there. Let's see, and I translate the very end as the ones caused to be rescued. That's what one of the translations renders it for the Septuagint. The men who are rescued from Mount Zion. And I think that makes more sense than how the King James Version translates it as, and Savior shall come up on Mount Zion. So I think the ones cause to be rescued makes more sense. It's basically Israel will be saved, rescued, and they are the ones who will ascend, and they will judge Edom. They will judge Esau. And the kingdom shall be for you. So it ends on a very positive note. And I think this is a very close approximation to the original book of Obadiah for this one small section of the prophecy directed towards Edom. But now, here's the thing. Since I have proven that Jeremiah is clearly quoting a lot and using a lot of allusions to the book of Obadiah, now that makes us have to question, he must have done this with other prophets, because it doesn't make sense he would do that with just, he must have done this with other nations. Because in Jeremiah, he does a whole thing about the nations. We see right here, well, first, he prophesies about Egypt and Babylon. But then he has, thus saith the Lord against the Philistines, concerning Edom, concerning the sons of Ammon, concerning Kedar, the queen of the palace, concerning Damascus, concerning Moab. So see what I'm saying? And then finally, thus said the Lord God of Israel, take the cup of this unmixed wine from mine hand, and thou shalt cause all the nations to drink, to whom I send thee. And they shall drink and vomit and be mad because of the sword which I send among them. This image of drinking the cup is very similar to what Obadiah said of the drink. Let's see. Where's the drink? Yeah, so we have the drink imagery, very similar. But why would Jeremiah only quote for one of the nations, say for one of the nations, almost an entire quotation of predominantly quotations from the book of Obadiah? But all the other prophets, he wouldn't be quoting anything? That's highly improbable. It must be the case that these other prophets, he was also quoting some unknown prophets. And my belief is that he wasn't quoting other prophets, he was quoting other parts of the book of Obadiah, the original book of Obadiah. And this makes sense because why would Obadiah be sent only to Edom? And now watch this. This is even cooler because it supports what I'm saying. Now look, let me just exit out of this stuff here. Oops. So Amos 1 and 2. Now we look. 3 transgressions. This is amazing. In Amos, we see, thus says the Lord, 3 transgressions of Damascus, 3 transgressions of Gaza, which is from the Philistines, 3 transgressions of Tyre, 3 transgressions of Edom, 3 transgressions of Ammon, 3 transgressions of Moab, 3 transgressions of Judah, 3 transgressions of Israel. And that's it. Those are the nations. And these are essentially the same exact nations that Jeremiah is prophesying against. So this can't be coincidence. Amos is using another source, a common source that Jeremiah is using. Jeremiah is speaking specifically to nations that are identified in Amos only. So we've got that amazing connection. And Amos was hundreds of years before Jeremiah did his prophecy, or at least 100 years more before. So this idea, Jeremiah's must have gotten from another source, and Obadiah, a single source, makes the most sense for how it was gotten by both Amos and Jeremiah. Amos and Jeremiah had this information for all these different nations from the same source, And the only way it could have been from the same source is if, it's the same exact nations, and the only way that makes sense is if they both used the same exact source, because Obadiah using Amos as a source doesn't make sense. It's clear Jeremiah, what I meant to say was that Jeremiah using Amos as a source exclusively doesn't make sense. Because there's not enough information in Amos that clearly supports Jeremiah's usage of Amos as his primary basis. So, but the fact that it's the same nations shows that they must have both been using the same source. That's the only way to explain it. And since he so heavily puts it and uses it so much in his prophecy of Edom, there must have been that Obadiah also prophesied of those other nations that Jeremiah and Amos both isolate. And we see in Ezekiel, interestingly enough, let's take a look. Or we go to Edom. Let's take a look here. Okay, proclamation against Ammon from Ezekiel, proclamation against Moab, proclamation against Edom, proclamation against Philistia, the Philistines, proclamation against Tyre. Wow. So we've got Tyre, we've got Philistines, Edom, Moab, Ammon. That's all from Amos as well. Interesting. And now we also look for, let's see if there's Damascus as well. Damascus is included as part of the Tyre. So yeah, that's a pretty clear connection there. Ezekiel is doing the same exact nations. Obviously, Ezekiel is using the same source as well of highlighting specifically those nations. And now Isaiah. Look at the Philistines again. Oops, Philistines. Okay, so the burden about the Philistines. Then proclamation against Moab. Here's the burden about Moab. Then burden against Damascus. Now we've got one against Ethiopia, though. Although it's not introduced with the same, we have to remember that the proclamation, this heading is added. So this heading probably should not be there. But now there's Egypt, and Jeremiah also does against Egypt, so that makes sense. So does Ezekiel. And Babylon as well. Jeremiah does Babylon. But now look, proclamation against Edom. And then there's also Arabia and Jerusalem. Tyre. So then you got impending judgment on the earth, which was how I reconstructed the whole idea of what Obadiah was doing. The restoration of Israel. So you see, that makes a lot of sense, what I'm saying. Let's see, is there anything else to say here? Oh yeah, and then Ammon. Ammon was not in this, but they have Ammon as, yeah, so maybe there was a section on Ammon that was originally part of Isaiah that got removed accidentally somehow. Who knows? But anyway, so that's very close, very, very close to what we see for Amos. So I think the best explanation for that is that in the original book of Obadiah, there was a prophesying to all the nations, not all the nations, but specific nations which had sinned against Israel, and Israel and Judah themselves, sinning, they were major sin. So Obadiah prophesied against all those nations, and as a result, many later prophets were influenced by Obadiah's choice of prophesying to those nations. And Jeremiah clearly connects it with Obadiah in a way that I'm fairly convinced that his prophecies on the nations are highly the vast majority of it, I'd say at least half of it, is derived from an original book of Obadiah. And if that's not the case, if it's not the original book of Obadiah, that all these prophecies come, it has to be other books of prophets, other lost books of prophets that covered these nations, because it doesn't make sense for Jeremiah. Again, it doesn't make sense for him to put so much quotation emphasis for the prophecy for Edom, but not for the other nations, even though the style of his prophecies for the nations is very similar for each nation. So the fact that it's so similar makes a unity, a commonality. And the fact that there's a commonality in unity suggests that it has to be from one source. And since we know that one of the nations' sources for one of the nations was the book of Obadiah, since it has to be one source, since it makes the most sense that it has to be one source, where Jeremiah got this unified message of prophecies to these nations, makes sense that they were all from the book of Obadiah, these prophecies, and that's why Amos specifically names those nations for the transgressions. So anyways, that's and you got an Amos right here. You've got Timan, Basra, and let me see, Dedan, and Ezekiel, yeah, so Dedan, here, Timan and Dedan in the prophecy of Ezekiel against Edom. Timan, Dedan, so that supports my reconstruction of Dedan. Anyways, so that's my that is my presentation for this first book that I have done of my reconstructed version of the Bible. And you can see it's very controversial, has a lot of extra stuff and altered stuff, but I believe it's very close to the original text, and it's certainly very compelling, I think, what I've been finding. And this stuff doesn't apply to just this one book. It applies to so many of the other books of the Old Testament and New Testament. So I hope you stay tuned for more future studies that I'll be doing. This is the first video in the series. I'm going to be doing every book that I complete. I'm going to be doing videos dedicated to explaining my translation process, so you guys can benefit from it and understand how I'm justifying a lot of these alterations and changes that I make. With that said, God bless you guys. Hope you enjoyed it and that this was a spiritually beneficial time for you. I'll see you guys soon. Oh, wait, hold on. One more thing. So we've got places where God is speaking. So right here is where God is speaking. And then Obadiah speaks. And then we have God speaking again, followed by Obadiah speaking. Then God speaking again. And God speaking goes all the way down to here. Then Obadiah starts speaking again. All the way down to here. Then God starts speaking again. And then Obadiah starts speaking. God speaks again. Then Obadiah for the rest of it. So I'm gonna release a PDF version of this either tonight or tomorrow, of this version of Obadiah that I've done. Hope you guys enjoy it. And if you need me to send it to you in an email, if you're not on Facebook, I can send it to you in email as well. All right. Anyways, God bless you guys, and looking forward to studying with you guys in the future. Peace. Shalom. Bye.